Are you looking to get ready, be prepared, and transform your financial future? Then you've come to the right place. This is the Get Ready Money podcast with Tony Stewart, where Tony has insightful conversations with financial experts who are changing the way we think about money. Catch up on the latest financial trends and hear practical advice from Tony and his expert guests so you can build healthy habits that work. Be empowered with tips for implementing small changes that can have a big impact on your financial future. So sit back and get ready to hear from today's guest.
Welcome to the Get Ready Money podcast, changing the way we think about money. I'm pleased to be joined today by Cady North. Cady is an author and founder of North Financial Advisors. In this episode, we'll be discussing Cady's insights on how we change the way we think about money and dreaming big. Cady, welcome to the Get Ready Money podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Tony.
Yeah, excited for the conversation. So let's get started with a little bit about you. What is your origin story?
Yeah, so I am a career changer. I came from the corporate world, actually doing a lot of advocacy in Congress around financial regulations. And after a period of burnout and taking a sabbatical, I decided to sort of pivot and move more into personal finance. And I launched at that time my financial planning practice called North Financial Advisors.
Well, that's interesting with your background in advocacy in Congress is because, I had some experience myself with the California Department of Insurance. I mean, is that what spurred you to thinking about being in financial services yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, I like a lot of people, in their 20s and maybe early 30s, I was doing a lot of kind of soul searching. And for me, I think, journaling is a really great way to explore some of those things for me. And so I remember writing down in a journal probably 8 years, even before I started my financial planning practice or really had any clue how to do this. I had written down that I wanted to do more one-on-one personal finance kind of work rather than kind of the more corporate space. And, it just was a seed that was planted, I think.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So if it's okay, just curious about talking a little bit more about Congress is, because I know in California, though, it's hard to move things through the legislature, even if, they were possibly obvious to me.
Right.
I mean, do you feel sometimes that maybe that impacts money and how people are thinking about it? Because, some of these things just take a while to happen in Congress.
Yeah,
and they get diluted.
They do. I think that's by design as well. I mean, the government is meant to move slowly because you don't want wholesale changes in laws and regulations like every year or every 6 months, right? And so I think state legislatures, some state legislatures don't even meet every single year. They maybe only meet every other year. Congress tends to move very slowly as well because they want to deliberate and discuss. And, I think that plays a role too in just how it mirrors a little bit in how people manage their personal finances. Change is hard across the board, whether we're looking at, congressional approval process of new laws and regulations, or we're looking at our careers or our personal finances. Change is often really hard. The status quo is our brain. It's like a well-worn path in our brains, and it's easy to stick with what we've always done.
Yeah, well, I love that. And that directly does impact money and all parts of our lives. And I think, for Congress, changes are big that they make sometimes, and they have unintended consequences, I think, as we've seen from other legislation. Is like, wow, I don't think that's quite what they intended. We see how
exactly.
it plays out. And I know they go through that, like the what ifs scenarios. So that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you talking about that a little bit. So, let's switch gears and talk about your book. What inspired you to write The Art of the Sabbatical?
Yeah, so I would say that I've become a sabbatical advocate by accident. When I took my sabbatical back in 2015 before launching my financial planning practice, I did not know then how transformative and how powerful that experience would be in my life. For me, I was very burned out in my career, and I knew that I just couldn't continue going forward, and I had to kind of stop the spinning, as I like to call it, and stop the stress altogether. And for me, I just needed to not do anything. And it was a big teaching moment for me because I think I had placed so much of my self-worth in achievement and busyness and getting stuff done in my career that when I didn't have that anymore, it was a way to relearn who I was when I wasn't working. And that in turn helped me discover, I think, how to build a business and how to create something for myself that wasn't so hustle focused, that was very sustainable for me and created a lot of balance in my life that I didn't have prior to my sabbatical.
Interesting, because I think that's something a lot of us struggle with as we come out of college, maybe, or high school, and we go into our careers, and then, we just go one thing follows the other, and then all of a sudden, 20 or 30 years you're in. So that really did allow you to calibrate. Now, was that between your career in Congress and financial planning?
It was, yeah, yeah. It was, I was working for a global news and data organization. So I was more like communicating and analyzing what Congress was doing to the general public and to businesses and kind of playing that role of translator. And that lends itself really well to financial planning, right? Because in my work with clients, that's kind of my role. It's like, I want to explain and help them understand, not just what the IRS is doing or new regulations on the books are doing, but in general, just give them a way to learn more about their personal finances and feel more empowered. Um, and so I was able to, take that previous experience and utilize it. And I think it makes me a better planner. Having had the experience working in corporate, it's like I kind of understand my clients more, the kinds of compensation packages they get, the kinds of negotiation that they do whenever they're up for promotion and that sorts of things. So that plays a big role in the work that I do with clients.
Well, that's awesome. And I think you said something to emphasize that, quite a few of my guests talk about is helping clients feel empowered. I mean, why do you feel that's a core? Because a lot of advisors, I think, come from that school, like, I'm going to help I'm going to more tell my clients what to do rather than
Yeah.
allow the clients to make those decisions for themselves.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think this was crystallized for me so clearly when I was doing my MBA program at Georgetown, right? All of us in that program on my cohort were very successful in our careers. We maybe had multiple kind of certifications and educational backgrounds behind our names, right? Not just the MBA that we were working on. And yet, and we were all of a similar age as well. And yet, there were so many that had a lot of fear and anxiety and concern around personal finances. And even being someone in corporate finance, for instance, and leveling up in their career in that way does not necessarily mean that you will have the skills to manage your own personal finances effectively. And so, I grew up in a family where I learned to do a lot of this stuff early on. My parents were small business owners. I was like balancing the business checkbook when I was a kid, working in the office, collecting sales tax and calculating it and all that kind of stuff. And so I kind of had a comfortability with spreadsheets and finances in a way that a lot of people don't grow up with. And so I knew going through that MBA program that there was an opportunity to work with people who were working professionals who are younger that aren't normally served by this profession, who aren't retiring or about to retire, right? And so it's definitely something that it requires a different approach, right? Like you're a partner and a sounding board for your clients as they move through their careers and build their wealth versus someone coming at you saying, well, do this, not that. I find that there's just a lot more success that clients have when it feels like an empowering approach.
I love that. And I think that's so important for advisors and insurance agents to think about is to be a partner with your client,
Yeah.
to help your client guide them as a counselor rather than as a director, I guess. you know.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's what good coaches do, is they
Sure.
help people succeed and learn. So one of the things you talk about is dreaming big. Why should people dream big?
Yeah. I mean, I think this comes up with my work and coaching clients who are taking sabbaticals too, right? It's like I think when we talk about the status quo in our careers, it's kind of like the next thing, the big thing might be feel scary and unknown, and so our brains shut down and say, maybe we shouldn't do this. It feels a little scary. But when we start to do something, think of, dare to dream bigger for ourselves, like deciding to take an extended time off from work when all of our peers are saying, no, you must work, 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 and build your career ladder and keep going and keep moving. It takes a lot of courage, and I think it takes a lot of brain power to like turn the wheels and kind of shift gears in that way. And when we do this though, and having the courage to do something like take a sabbatical, right? It unlocks things that we never knew we even needed to understand or work on, right? And for me, that's the way it happened. It's like I didn't even know how much of a role work played in terms of my self-esteem. And when I was able to divorce that from my personhood, right, and for a period of time, it helped me develop a healthier way of thinking about work and balance in my life. And to me, that's a growth moment. That's a huge growth moment that wouldn't have happened had I not dared to dream a little bigger for myself and, have the courage to take the time off from work.
I love that. Dare to dream a little bigger. So I just that is awesome. So, let's talk about the courage that it takes because, there are a lot of people, I mean, whether we're talking about taking sabbatical or like you starting their own firm or writing a book, I've talked to so many people in financial services who are all like, I'd like to write a book, but that I don't know if I can do it. I'm a little nervous about it. I mean, how do you encourage people to, because I don't want to say find the courage, but to discover the courage within themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the people that I know who've done big things and dreamed big for themselves, they don't just sit in a vacuum and do it, right? Like, you need people around you who are supportive, and you need to find, I mean, mentorship is kind of a loaded word, I think, for a lot of people, but find people that you can bounce ideas off of and feel supported by. And when you do that, you start to feel not so alone in your crazy ideas. And I think that can give you energy in a lot of ways. A lot of the work that, I've done with the Kinder Institute, I'm a registered life planner, shows that, when you build energy around your purpose and your vision, that's when the change can happen. When we don't have that energy and it's just an idea or a side something comes across your mind, right? It's hard to take action on it, but one way that we can build energy is by talking to people and learning more about, like, if the idea is to write a book, right, learning more about the experience of other people have had writing a book and how they were able to be successful. And I know for me personally, had I not joined a writing cohort, I probably wouldn't have had my first book written and definitely not had my second book written. So for me, joining a writing cohort was really powerful because I could link up with people once a week and chat about my progress. And it didn't have to be anything fancy, but it kept the energy moving.
Well, that's awesome. And yes, so you mentioned George Kinder, who I've been fortunate enough to have on this show,
Yeah,
and who is simply amazing. So a shout out to George Kinder and the Kinder Institute.
yeah,
There'll be links in there because being a life planner is, you know, such a different way of looking at serving clients that it's just amazing. So I want
yeah,
to shout
yeah,
out to that for people. So and as you point out, is a support system
yeah.
is key. That you need to find a support system for anything that you do, even if it's just to chat about it and go through it. So I love that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, one of the things that we also talk about is women tending to be a little bit risk averse is why are women risk averse? And do you think this also impacts what we've been talking about with daring to dream?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think women are risk averse per se, but I think women are very intentional looking at the long term of things, right? We see this on corporate boards, like where corporate boards have more women on the board, they tend to make more long-term decisions and better decisions in the outcome of the company. Whereas 100% male board will tend to take higher risks on the front end, and maybe not all of them will pan out. And so I like to reframe this. I don't think women are risk averse at all. I think women are just very intentional. And so this does play a role in what they're willing to do, right? I mean, I think women like to learn a lot about something before they make a decision to do something. And this could go towards the decision to start investing, maybe outside of a retirement account. Um, a woman would want to learn everything about it before making a choice. And maybe is more likely to bring on someone to help with that before making the choice. Whereas a man might read an article and think, yeah, I'm going to do this. So we start to see this dichotomy play out. But what we do know from research is that women are better investors in the long run when they do invest. And so there's a real power there that women have. And I think it's just a matter of, building each other up and making sure that we are plugging in to learn new things and, making decisions that are going to be in our best interest for the long run.
That's awesome. And that's something I've heard from other guests is that women tend to take that longer approach. And I know in my own, when I've worked with clients in the past, is that generally men are oftentimes focused on the return of the investment
Mm,
or the price of the investment rather than making sure they're actually accomplishing the goal.
yeah.
Uh, I guess getting stuck in the tactics rather than the entire process.
Yeah, yeah, kind of the shiny object syndrome. I mean, in a way, it's like it's very tempting to buy into that, but it's like you really do when it comes to investing or really anything about wealth building, you really do need to think about the long term.
Yeah, I love that. It's important to think of the long term. And crypto bros just crossed my mind because it is bros, they're
Yeah,
talking
it
about
does tend
crypto.
to be.
I know
Yeah.
we could go on that. I know we could go down that road, but I think that's a really good illustration when we think about, the whole crypto movement is
Hmm.
for the most part, it's a conversation about men. Um,
Yeah.
so you don't see a lot of women out there uh, talking about crypto, or at least I guess leading the conversation, maybe that's a good way to put it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's awesome. One of the other things you talk about is building resilience. And I don't know, does that also build into, maybe what you discovered during your sabbatical or during your travels how did that come to you that resilience is such an important part of uh, being financially successful and successful overall?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, my first book, The Resiliency Effect, which came out in 2020, that was my COVID project, my COVID baby that I birthed. I talk a lot about how resilience is actually a double-edged sword because things that happen in our lives that create resilience also we carry with, fragments of that may be getting in our way, right? And an example of that for me, having grown up and had to like become very financially independent from a young age and learn a lot of things on my own is I think that's what played into me focusing so much on work and achievement to try to have my self-esteem needs met. And so while I was a very resilient person from the outside and could do a lot of things on my own, fiercely independent, right? There were fragments that remained from time earlier in my life that were holding me back. And so when it comes to resilience, I think it's always important to examine that dual-edged sword, right? And things that could have protected us in the past may no longer we may no longer need them or parts of them. And so while we may have gotten through it and had resilience as a result, we've got to look at the other side of it, sort of the shadow side of what may be holding us back that is related to that resilience we built.
Yeah, I think that's good. Is I think with money is that's often a huge issue. Is there is something that's holding us back, and that self-examination is so important to come back and do that. So, we haven't really touched on that book. Before we jump into the get ready questions, just tell us a little bit about that book.
Yeah. So like I said, the resiliency effect came about, it was my COVID project. And I think what I was really seeing in my practice at the time with clients is that lots of people could name big dreams that they had for themselves, but very few were actually acting on them. And there were things holding them back. And I think it goes back to a lot of what we were talking about, the status quo effect of like that feels safe, that feels secure. Taking a risk might feel a little jolting for our bodies and our brains. But throughout the book, I have a lot of journal prompts that help explore some of the background related to our feelings on the big goals that we have on our life generally. And so, for me, a big inspiration for that book was doing the morning pages. I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's
No,
it's a book, and it's an approach to kind of unlock creativity that lies dormant in all of us. And it's really just about a daily writing process and journaling process. And so for me, I was going through that at the same time that I was writing the book. And so a lot of the discoveries that I was making for myself, I was able to incorporate reflection pieces from that. And so it was a very cool experience because it wasn't solely a personal finance book per se, though there's some personal finance wisdom in there too. It was more like a broader life reflection kind of a book.
that's awesome. So that's great. So let's jump into the get ready money questions. These are the questions that I'll ask all my guests, are a little bit more rapid fire.
Yeah.
The first one is, what basic money concept do you wish people knew?
Um, this probably gets talked about a lot on your show, but the concept of compound money. I know that like Roth accounts didn't become a thing really until the mid to late 90s, but I always say like I wish someone had told me back then, like start your Roth, right? I was in high school at the time. So it's like if somebody had told me to put tax-free money away from my income, I would have much more in my Roth IRA account because of compound interest, right? It would have grown and compounded in the background. And, but I didn't necessarily have that information in high school. I learned about it much later. But compound interest is this magical thing that the earlier you start, and what you can do for your kids too is amazing because you can start them very young, growing and compounding through investing in a way that will create wealth for them well into the future.
That's awesome. And you're right. That is something that probably at least half the guests bring up, compound interest. And I'm always glad when a guest brings that up because I hope that reinforces for everyone listening, whether you're a consumer, the importance of compound interest for yourself, or if you're in financial literacy education, making sure that you're talking about the magic of compound interest. And as longtime viewers and listeners of the show know, we have an episode dedicated to just compound interest that we'll I'll link to in the show notes. So I'm glad you brought that up, Cady. That's awesome. Um, so, what is one simple thing people can do each year to set themselves up for financial success?
Taking some extra time to review your benefits that are offered to you at your job is a really powerful way to learn something about your personal finances, but also save money. And I'm thinking an array of everything that you elect at work, like looking at your tax withholdings and trying to understand that more, looking at the healthcare options that you're being given, the life insurance and the disability insurance options you're being given, and making sure you're learning a little bit about it each year. That you're also evaluating the amazing wealth building tool, which is saving in your workplace retirement plan. And you can't just select that number one time and then forget about it. Like you've always got to be pushing forward. The IRS updates the maximums that you can contribute to those accounts every year. And so it's always worth a review of taking a look at all of these, wealth building components that are just being offered at your workplace. And they're often forgotten about because it's another one of those things where it's like we pick it one time and we think, I learned it back then. I'm just going to stick with the same thing. But it's not always the same year after year. and it's a
Yeah,
good time to review it for sure.
yeah. No, I strongly urge people to do it, and people who subscribe to my newsletter. Those, is are some of the weekly action items reviewing different areas of your employee benefits, because I think so many people, as as you say, are on autopilot when it comes to their employee benefits. And
Yep.
sometimes it's, as you mentioned, it's like, well, this is what I've done. But a lot of it is that you need to take the time to examine the different benefits. There's a lot of power in what companies, a lot of employers offer to you as an employee.
Yeah.
So it's worth the time to go through it and learn about it and
Yeah.
see what you're being
And
offered.
there's even ways, to give yourself a raise just by looking at your tax withholdings and selecting your benefits in the right way, right? You don't have to ask your boss for this kind of raise. It's like this stuff is so powerful, it can actually impact what you take home in your take home pay. So it's real money, you know.
Definitely. Yeah. And that's the thing, as you point out, with the retirement plan and corporate matches and
Hmm.
the different options, taking a look at maybe the default investment. If your company has a default investment for the
Yep.
401k, is that the right investment for you? Does it have the lowest expense charges? As you talk about, one way to give yourself a raise is to save on the expense charges on the investments in
Hmm.
your retirement account.
Yep,
A lot of good things you can do for yourself.
for
So the
sure.
next question is, what is one habit that people can change when it comes to their money?
I think figuring out what your habits are around money is a good way to start with that. Because I see the gamut, right, of people who are money avoidant, who will kind of put their head in the sand and not do anything. And that's a habit that needs to be explored, like sort of the why do I do that? And then there's also people who make, fast and split decisions around purchases that maybe could stand to deliberate a little bit more on things. And so I think it's definitely, the first step is to examine like what are your habits around money and where did those come from? When maybe think about like what are your first memories around money and what experiences you have really early on. Those can be really good ways to help you learn more about yourself and maybe start to shift your thinking a bit more so that you can make better decisions.
That's awesome. That's great advice. Is, as you mentioned, is there are oftentimes things that we do with our money that stem from past experiences. Even growing up as a child, if you saw your parents argue about money, that may keep you from communicating with your partner about
Yeah.
money, because you equate it in your mind with like, "Oh, if I talk about money with my partner, we might end up arguing, and that's a bad thing." So,
Right, right.
understanding that. So, Katie, what money myth are you trying to break?
Money myth. Let's see. I think me personally, because I grew up being very independent, like having and literally having to, cover myself for my expenses and things like that. Paid for my own college, had to learn how to. I worked full time during my college, so I could, pay my rent, that kind of thing, right? I think I've been on a lifetime journey of undoing some of the thinking that is like save, save, save at all costs. And protect at all costs because there is value in being able to spend money when it's necessary. And I think taking that sabbatical back in 2015 was also a good teacher on that front because it was a time when I had been saving a ton of money. I had enough money to live off of for 3 years if I really needed to. And that gave me enough courage and enough safety feeling to start living off of that income for a little while, which created a lot more opportunity for me, which created a lot more openness and excitement, right? In the end, being able to launch my firm and have a new way of working that wasn't so hustle focused. And so I think, there's some of that continues with me today. The saving and the protection of wealth, but I've been able to let go of it along the way, which has been good for me.
Well, that is awesome. And I think that's something, especially when we look at people who are retiring, is them flipping the switch from accumulation to spending is something that a lot of people struggle with. For a number of really good reasons, but it's also
Hmm.
that permission because sometimes in personal finance, it can be so extreme, like the FIRE movement, financial
Yeah.
independence, retire early, and people are like not spending anything, but you're not enjoying your life at the same time and finding freedom because it sounds like that decision brought you freedom in other
Yeah.
ways.
For sure, no question. And I think, going back to things that I wish people knew more is like money and wealth is an income stream and it should be thought of that way, not just like, something on the shelf you're collecting, right? It actually represents an income stream and you should think of it that way when you examine alternative situations, whether it's jobs, saving more, saving less, all those sorts of things.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, the next question, Katie, is we're going to get out the time machine for a second.
Mhm.
What advice would you give your younger self if you could go back in time, knowing what you know now about money?
Um, you know, I would want my younger self to have more confidence around moving into the personal finance space earlier. Like I said, I wanted to do this for a long time, and I maybe didn't know how or didn't have the mentorship in my life to figure it out. But I think had I been a little bit more curious and reaching out to people and finding some mentors, I would have been able to launch his career much sooner, and that would have been great for me. So, um, so that's I think what I would wish. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's great advice. So, what is your number one go-to money resource for yourself? Your favorite money resource, whether it's a podcast, book, newsletter, app, website, where what do you turn to?
I love a good old Investopedia, reading articles on Investopedia. I think that's a really great information source to when we talk about like breaking up, not needing to learn the whole thing overnight, but maybe breaking up into smaller pieces. Investopedia is a great resource to learn a little bit about topics just in a few minutes.
Yeah, Investopedia is a great resource. It's one of my go-to resources as well. So I encourage people
Yeah.
to check it out. There'll be a link to Investopedia in the show notes. So, Katie, to wrap up, what is your number one tip on changing the way we think about money?
Money is a tool that we all have. And I think you can do a lot of things with your money more than you think if you spend the time to make priorities and build a plan around those priorities. In my work, trying to encourage people to take sabbaticals, a lot of people would think, well, how am I ever going to have the money to support myself? But really, it just takes some thought and planning ahead. And over the course of months and years, you can build up resources to cover you for something like that. You just have to have the idea and then you can build a plan around it.
Have an idea and build a plan around it. And I think that's such a key is that you do need to have a plan around it, is that so many people, for whatever reason, don't make a plan with their money. But as you point out, it's a tool and it's a
Mhm.
resource. And
Yeah.
understanding how to use a specific tool allows you to use it better. And that goes for any tool, physical
Mhm.
or like we talked about with money. So, where can people learn more about you? Where can they pick up a copy of your books, The Artists, The Sabbatical, and The Resiliency Effect?
Yeah, so all the books are available on Amazon and anywhere you get your books, frankly. I mean, Audible, both of them are an audiobook. You can find it more about me and some of the work that I do at cadynorth.com. My name's spelled a little funny, so I've got to spell it out, CADYNORTH.com.
That's awesome. And as always, there will be links in the show notes to find Katie's books, social media profiles, and to her websites. So, Katie, thanks for taking the time to join us today on the Get Ready Money podcast.
Yeah, nice chatting, Tony.
Yeah, and thank you, everyone, as always, for tuning in to this episode of the Get Ready Money podcast. If you learned something today to change the way you think about money, please be sure to subscribe and to tell a friend. Until next time. Let's change the way we think about money.